hopefully you guys will learn a lot today as we talk about DePin. I think the first thing we'll do is I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, let them tell you a little bit about themselves, and maybe you can also tell us what was kind of your introduction, your first introduction to DePin. Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So, hi, my name is Jeff Outlaw. I'm a Chief Experience Officer at Yum. And Yum is a DePin that is built to help solve the problems of cloud gaming. We were able to stream high-end games to to any URL on any device. So that's a problem that we're solving. My experience with DePin was actually having our CTO explain to me what it was that he built before I even really fully understand what I was getting involved with.
So your introduction was your company.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, sorry.
Great.
And my experience is I've been in video games for 24 years. My first game shipped on the GameCube, so back in the day.
Yeah,
so I've been at it this long time.
absolutely. I had a GameCube too. John, how about you?
Good. Nice to see everybody here. John Zannos. I'm a partner at Digital Ubiquity Capital. We do two things. We invest in projects that deploy fiber internet structures in the municipalities in Canada and the U.S. West Hollywood, Nova Scotia as examples. And at the same time, we're investors in startups and early technology companies. And we're integrating blockchain into our solution set to execute transactions between the customer, our operation as the developer, and the subcontractors that are building the network for us. My exposure has been early in distributed compute and before it was DePin, shared compute and storage infrastructure, and have a long history in a shared telecom infrastructure, which is how all phones work.
Yeah. All right, Matthew, thank you for doing double duty today, back-to-back sessions. I appreciate it. Why don't you talk? I don't think you need to introduce yourself again, but you can if you want.
Just in case there's anyone new. So Matthew Schneider, the CEO and founder of Building Inc., and we tokenize construction data and commercial real estate assets.
And what was your initial introduction?
So my exposure to DePin was inadvertent. We had a vision of building smart cities. And the way that smart cities interact, how they're formulated, is that you have buildings that form a network. You have buildings become nodes, which is essentially what a DePin network is. And so we started envisioning that perhaps with a mix of renewable energy, smart building technology, IoT, and smart city philosophy, that buildings could begin to interact with one another. And you see a lot of these use cases in DePin emerging, whether it's energy. Could we trade energy between buildings instead of just relying on centralized utilities? Or compute. Could we have data centers or servers within buildings and have that engagement?
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Chris Marzilli, founder of Marz. We're a Web3 consulting and strategy firm. I found out about DePin in my boredom of COVID in 2020. Joe, who was supposed to be on this panel but couldn't, unfortunately, due to COVID, he had messaged me in a Telegram group and started talking to me about this new project where you could spin up Linux servers, put them on their network, and they will reward you for the compute, which is essentially decentralized AWS, which is what I called it until, I think, 2023 or 2022, the term DePin, which is decentralized infrastructure, physical infrastructure networks, came about. So I guess my first question, Jeff, to you, how would you explain DePin to someone who's maybe unfamiliar with it and maybe even unfamiliar with blockchain in general?
Yeah, well, I had to do this with my wife, so I'll do it for the crowd here. So really what it means is if you take a central server, which is what an Amazon server is, that's all combined into one big building, and that's a massive building. It takes a lot to construct it. It takes a lot of energy to run it. They're running AC units and those kinds of things. It's a heavy investment. So what a DePin does, and I talk about my case, it's just the easiest for me. I'm not super technical. But what we do is instead use gaming computers around the world to act as that Amazon server. We just link them all together through our network. So if you have a gaming rig at home, in our case, and this works differently, some DePins work off of phones and some work on other systems, but if you have a gaming rig at home and you hook yourself up to our network, we use your computer the same way we would use Amazon. What it helps for, in our case, is that the cost comes way down because, again, we're not having to build a building and then run the AC and maintain it. But the other part of it is for games, you need to have a really fast connection between the person who's using it and the network itself. So one of the problems that Google Stadia tried to do cloud gaming, and they failed because the latency was so bad. The end user was too far away from the server, and it would just not reach them in time, and the game would be laggy. But when we're using a node like someone's gaming rig around us, the latency is super low because our orchestrator finds a node closest to the end user. So that's a use case. Again, I apologize if it sounds like I'm showing my projects. It's just the only way that I really know how to explain what a DePin does. It finds equipment around the world and uses that equipment, ties it together into one big network. But again, it can be done off of phones, just some software. You don't have to have a hardware attachment to it. Helium is an example that kind of ran early. People know what that is, but
yeah, I think Helium's a great example of basically a decentralized IoT network.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're doing a decentralized gaming network, which is one of the things that I love most about DePin is that it can span all industries. And so,
yeah, and Chris, just to add one thing, because I was excited when we got out of the terminology of calling it decentralized X and starting called DePin because of the P. Because what we're talking about, physical infrastructure. So think we all come from a technical, pseudo-technical background or field. But when you think of any asset that can be shared and then blockchain enabling that fractionalization, so rewarding the supplier and rewarding the consumer, that's how you can think of DePin much more broadly. And when you think about embedding blockchain to enable that, just simplify it to contracts that are automated that execute without people in between them. Right,
Yeah,
that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a great example where suppliers, people who are supplying the compute, in your case probably GPU for gaming.
It's actually the full computer, but yeah.
The full computer, the full rig. So they're getting rewarded, and then the consumers are being able to get access without needing a full
Yeah, one of the big upsides is we decentralize the revenue. These DePins allow people to, instead of giving all of our revenue to Jeff Bezos or some central, billionaire, we actually can put that revenue out in the stream, in the local economies through the node operators. Right?
Yeah. So let's move from the gaming industry to the real estate industry. And this is one of the things I said I love about DePins is because it spans. Why don't you talk about your experience and what you're looking to do with building as far as setting up a real estate DePin?
Right. So it goes back to creating this network between buildings. And the use case that we're most excited about is trading energy. So for example, a building could be equipped with a solar panel. And so it is collecting energy on its own, maybe as a cost-saving metric or because they want to be sustainable. But they're going to collect that energy, they're going to store it. Well, what happens when they have an excess of energy? Perhaps their neighbor needs it. And now they could actually trade that at a competitive price to a neighboring building. And what this does in the big picture is it creates resilient infrastructure. Because if we're all dependent on something that is centralized, and there's an issue in the center, everyone is affected negatively. And so there is an interesting future that we could see where we're creating less dependency on centralized forces, especially in real estate, which when there's blackouts, we're all affected. When the internet is down, we're all affected. And creating these things that now control our daily lives and making them more resilient for whatever that might be. It could be climate, it could be war, it could be accident or human error. In addition, the compute portion. We envision that as commercial real estate buildings become more dependent on artificial intelligence, they're going to need somewhere to compute all of that. In addition, we could also say storage. They're going to have to store all that asset data somewhere. And if they could do that locally, it's far more cost effective than sending it out everywhere.
Cool. So I think we've touched on it a little bit, but John, maybe you can go into some of the advantages for both providers and consumers when it comes down to DePins. What are they getting out of it?
Yeah, so, this is an important question. Like, we don't do decentralization just because it's a fun idea, right? There has to be some real net benefit. One of them is resiliency, right? If you're doing something that's very dependent on resiliency, having that model distributed has value. Telecom network falls into that category. Compute, storage, IoT, all those things. And even just real estate models in general. The other thing is sovereignty, right? Like, what things you want, not necessarily in the hands of one individual, right? And probably the best example there is Helium versus Starlink, right? Where Elon Musk unilaterally decide I'm helping Ukraine, I'm not helping Ukraine, I am helping Ukraine. So, there's a value in the model being designed to allow for sovereignty, for all of us to have a bigger voice in what we use and depend on. The other thing is transactional efficiency. Like, we live in a world where we still have people in between the exchange of money and exchange of contracts. If anybody's bought a house, that's a big exercise on multiple fronts. Getting the money, sending the money, signing the contract, closing the contract, doing the closing. We're using blockchain in a way to say, in a simple example, we're building 1,000 miles of fiber network. We hire somebody and we're going to pay him for tasks completed mile by mile. Now, one way to do that is have somebody go out, say a mile's been completed, call my bookkeeper sends some money, the check gets cashed, the bank gets involved. The other way to do it is set up a smart contract, use a stable coin. The data comes in, 1 mile's built, the contract says, okay, that has been satisfied, check the box. X dollars of stable coins sent to contractor X in their wallet, no fuss, no muss. Now, we're far away from being able to do that at scale without concerns and anxiety, but technology-wise, we have no reason not to do that. Like, we can do that today.
Anything else you guys want to add?
No, that was good.
Yeah, I think, to me, some of the biggest advantages, you mentioned resiliency is an incredible one for decentralized systems. I think everybody here probably knows if AWS, Amazon East goes down outside of Virginia, half the apps on your phone basically stop working, right? Yeah. So decentralized networks actually help fix this problem.
Actually, you know what, I would have added one thing too. Because of the increased efficiency, all the costs of, again, I go back to the AC unit costs and the power and run one of those large central servers, it's expensive and it impacts the environment like massively. The cost of doing all that maintenance, where instead you put it in individual homes, the way that some of these systems do, that you don't have those same kind of overrides.
Yeah, I think that's a great advantage of it, and in a lot of cases you're actually reusing existing hardware. Right. A lot of people have extra hardware in their house. There's DePins that can use regular gaming rings. There's DePins out there for phones. There's DePins out there for servers. I would think there's a DePin almost out there that if you have a piece of hardware, you could probably find a DePin you could hook it up to and earn rewards, which will actually extend the life of compute hardware and reduce the environmental impact of it. So here's another topic that gets me excited about DePins because they're so pervasive and they can do so many different things. Jeff, I'll address this to you because I think you might be doing it, but can DePin networks leverage other DePin networks?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I keep going back on my own case every time, but we do for our system, our DePin is to do the streaming of the video, but we rely on a decentralized storage system to hold game data and hold game files. So certainly we've partnered up with a lot of other DePins, and there are piggybacking going on from DePin to DePin. I think that's true because not every piece of equipment can do every piece of the important piece of the puzzle, or can't do it as efficiently as you would want it to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it's good to give some examples. Like, I'm not sure what storage networks you're doing, but obviously the bigger one the biggest one is called Filecoin, right? And they're a distributed storage network. If you have extra storage, you can connect your storage to the Filecoin network, and you can say it's actually quite nice. If you have 500 gigs, you could say I only want Filecoin to have 250 gigs. And then you get rewarded for that for the amount of time that you have it there. So I'm assuming that's kind of like what you're doing with yours is that you use another decentralized storage network to address the needs for storage. So again, you don't need a centralized place to keep your data.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah.
Great. And then Matthew, I'm curious to know a little bit about commoditization of resources and how we drive revenue through that. How do you think DePins need to go out in the market and get those customers to then drive that revenue?
Well, first, it's going to be quite difficult because you're going up against a cartel called Energy. Whoever provides that, it could be We Energy or whoever. They're not exactly keen about everyone, having their own source of energy, and they poof out of existence, and we just have our own new economy that pops up. So getting this out to market is going to be a challenge. It might even take a crisis. But I think if we can demonstrate perhaps a potential use case would be serving an area that's completely unserved. If a major energy provider, utility company, is not already out there, then it's not their territory. And perhaps we could say, well, let's introduce an alternative energy model, commoditize it, and allow them to set up solar panels in this little community trades with amongst each other. That might work. That might work. It's difficult to say, though. I mean, we're seeing in other sectors that the institutions are still pushing back against it. I mean, think about the financial institutions. They even have an incentive. They save basis points when implementing the technology, and they're still not doing it. So in something like energy, where it's not in their best interest to give the power to the people, literally, oh, that's great. I got to use that.
Trademark.
We don't know how soon that could be implemented.
John, anything you want to add about the challenges?
Yeah, I think, first we have some baseline challenges of adoption, awareness, regulatory framework, and as we all know, this has hurt the crypto space and blockchain broadly. So let's assume we make progress of those challenges over the next 5 years, because if we don't, then we have a much bigger problem. So then we get into a way of thinking about adoption. And I think we have two paths to go down. One is we find greenfield examples and actually demonstrate a better way to do things. And I 100% agree with Matt. That's a longer term because you have to find the greenfield, you have to overcome resistance, you have to actually execute, you have 5 years of demonstrating success and capability, and then you convince somebody else to follow suit. The other way is embedding these technologies into problems that are already distributed, but maybe haven't been fully automated and certainly haven't incorporated blockchain. The classic example that we could think of is helium, right? Because they're not saying destroy Verizon and buy helium. They're saying we're another way for you to get capacity on the network, and we'll pay you a little bit as you make a node available. The other option is in IoT, right? There's very traditional models, and there's models that are starting to pull up that allow for some distribution of value. If you're bringing information to a municipality in their IoT solutions, maybe traffic, maybe smart city, maybe energy efficiency. So I think our best path for adoption is managing these two pieces. One is greenfield, so you're a company attacking a new problem set, probably in the gaming space, or solving a problem that already exists, but applying a better approach to it. And I think if you guys are wrestling with startups or new ideas, you got to figure out which swim lane you want to be in, because it's hard to be both, and then attack the problem. I think the advantage to just fixing, kind of being embedded in, quicker to market, less overall upside. Greenfield, you're hoping for a home run, bases loaded. So if you're able to do that, go to it. Just recognize there are going to be a lot more outs. Yeah. So you got to decide what you want to do.
Yeah, and then I had something else I was curious about to kind of play off of that is, Jeff, I'm wondering, what did it take, or what is it taking to bootstrap a DePin and launch it, and maybe compare it to how you might do it with traditional non-DePin methods, perhaps using AWS or Google Cloud Compute or something like that. What are the differences there?
Yeah, again, I'll use myself as an example because it's just easier for me. But we do run our demo on AWS. I think the challenge is it's a chicken and egg, right? You've got the demand for your product or your service, demand for your service, and then the supply of the physical components that enable that service. So in the case of us, the service we have is cloud gaming. And you can do that on Amazon right now, and that's where our testnet is built off of. But that's too expensive to run concurrently. That's the reason why we're building our system. To go into the individual node level, that individual DePin, where every gaming computer has a node already, that means we have to quickly sell that many nodes out into the market to cover everything we have on the Amazon, which is, again, you've got some spin up there to do. So what we're doing, and I think what a lot of systems will do, is they'll go to a mid-layer, right, and have that mid-layer stand up. The mid-layer, in our case, is much cheaper than Amazon, but not as inexpensive for us to run as that individual nodes. So try not to jump from step 1 to step 3 immediately is, I think, what the struggles that people will come up with. And having, again, using ourselves as an example, having some samples of the product, the games on a network, that we can manage to maintain while not having the massive cost of having that first layer solution. So having that second layer solution being inexpensive enough and hosting some things, proving the case that there's a supply, or there's a demand for that kind of service, and then having the supply step into it, and then always kind of balancing between that second and third layer.
It's great. It's good experience. All right. I have one last question, and then we'll take some audience questions. But if maybe each of you could kind of answer this question and give me your opinion. How do you see DePins evolving alongside the other, kind of crypto narratives that are out there, RWA, NFTs, DeFi? Where do you see its fit in the marketplace? Matthew, why don't we start with you?
I do believe that it's going to stay because anything that engages the real world tends to stick around. I think where we're getting a lot of trouble in the crypto space are the things that don't actually exist. They're imaginary. They're figments of your imagination. It's a meme coin, for example. However, what we are seeing a lot of interest in is something that solves a real world problem. And I can't believe it's taken us this long to figure that out, that we have to solve problems using technology. So if we can apply DePin, and again, there's so many different use cases, but when and where we apply DePin, I do think it's going to stick. And I was reading something, I don't have a statistic to back it up, so no source, but DePin might be the fastest growing sector in crypto right now. No one knew what it was. What is DePin? But now it's a huge conversation starter because it could radicalize or radically transform what our cities and society looks like.
Yeah. John?
My view is it's the only part that matters. It's a little bit extreme, but this make-believe financial system is going to be under pressure for a number of years. I know many of us have probably participated, made some good money, maybe lost some money, but adding value is proven to be difficult at a global scale. Now, there are countries that don't have functioning monetary systems, and they hugely benefit from this. Argentina comes to mind. Simply put, it's not US, Canada, it's not even Mexico, right? But simplifying how you decentralize infrastructure, the capital I, very broadly defined, has been around for a long time. I loved your example, Chris. You mentioned it the other day about Linux. I was an early participant in the Linux Foundation for open source software. This has been a long-term problem. How do you get people to participate in open source projects, which are shared projects, creating something that's decentralized, but compensating them accordingly for the effort? To be honest, blockchain solves that elegantly. And that's what we're applying here. Some physical asset or electronic asset or compute asset that is better shared than centralized, right? And all you have to read is any article in the New York Times, the Globe, the BBC, that we're all scared about 3 companies controlling the lifelines of all technology, right? Microsoft, Amazon, Google, right? So the idea that you can create a gaming network where many people are contributing compute, where you can create a telecom network where many people are contributing capacity, which is why I think if we look 5 years out, the thing that's happening in blockchain/crypto world will be DePin because it allows an elegant technology to be applied to really relevant physical problems, as Matt said.
That's a great answer, John. I think you're the first DePin maxi I think I've met. Yeah.
Maxi, yeah, absolutely.
Jeff?
Yeah, so I've been to a number of conferences this year, and the amount of side events and talks that happen around DePin has just grown and grown and grown. It seems to be taking over. And again, maybe
that's
I'm
where
just
we met,
soaked in
right?
it, right?
We met at a DePin day
Consensus.
at Consensus, right? Yeah.
And how many side events were going on around DePin in Austin that year?
Yeah.
It's massive, and I'm going to Singapore next week. Same thing. There's side events for DePin all over the place. We're partnering with a chain that's solely focused on doing DePin. Peak is a network that's only looking at or knowing that the real value of DePin is just a basic part of what blockchain was supposed to do, right? And I keep on going back to the idea of decentralizing revenue, putting revenue, and this works, extremely well for places in the world that aren't the U.S., right? That are where individuals are having a hard time reaching revenue. But the idea that you can make money from the equipment that you already own, and that money, that revenue, again, that value goes immediately into the local economies, is just one of the best benefits of having the DePin narrative taking hold and getting a real traction like it is.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, I'm out of questions, so let's take some questions from the audience. We got a microphone right here, right up front.
So where do you see most of the DePin action being built on? L1, L2, what chains?
Yeah.
right now, currently?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I'll take my first shot and let it to the panel. But I think going back a few years, most DePins were building their own L1. And Jeff had just mentioned Peak. There's a couple of them, IoTIX, and a few of them, and then there's even Solana. People are building on Solana, and I think that is helpful for a lot of DePins to not have to deal with building and maintaining their own L1. Helium famously built their own L1. It constantly went down. It constantly stopped working. It was a major issue for the node operators. They migrated from their own L1 over to Solana, which was no small task. But I think it's, you have to make the choice if you're a DePin, whether you want to do your own token or launch it on another one. The more newer DePins that I'm seeing are typically picking another chain to launch it on. What do you guys think?
Well, Theta was another one that was early on a DePin as well. But yeah, again, you see rise of a chain like Peak. I think exactly what you said. They were trying to do their own layer 2 or Helium's case, but moving to a layer 1 that's specifically designed for this DePin is probably the smarter move.
Yeah.
I just add, I think the main thing is stability, security, and reliability of the L1. And there's many options there, right? Some enterprise-y, some not. I think in parallel, the other big question, and we were just chatting about this, is what are the token economics you want associated with it? And I personally think the most important element there is you want to behave like a stable coin. We were just literally talking about this, that you don't want a lot of variability where you're paying your extended network. I know for the stuff we do, we couldn't tolerate it. I don't want to pay Chris 5 tokens Friday and maybe a month from Friday 15 tokens because the market moved, right? I'm going to transact fundamentally in a US dollar or stablecoin related, which is good for the work you're doing internationally because most countries want that stability in their currency, or at least at an individual level. If you get paid, you want to be able to buy whatever at that value. So I'm less concerned about which L1, to your question specifically, on the attributes of the L1 and the attributes of the token economics. And for me, we would shy away from anything that had wild variability economics because it makes it harder for that token to be transactional in the building of a network or transacting in IoT in buildings.
Any other questions? No? Oh, right here.
I'm Calvin. Thank you guys for the discussion. I think the idea of your computer earning revenue for you while you're not using it is very attractive. However, I believe it's accurate to say that the majority of nodes operate at a net loss. Most token issuance schedules favor the earliest adopters. So I was wondering if you guys have any ideas about how to adjust the economic models to incentivize becoming the 500th or 5,000th node on a network, knowing that in general, the more nodes you have, the more capable and secure your network is.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and I think you've really hit on something that maybe is a little bit of a plague on the industry. The more nodes you have, you have to divide up that revenue, right?
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg thing that I was talking about. And you've got, like, the thing to do is look at to see, is there a demand for as much supply as they're going to make available? And I know in our case, we talk a lot about the idea that we don't want to put more nodes out there than we have demand for because it's just undervalued to people who have been dedicated to giving us our work. Fortunately, video games, they're not going away. It's the dominant form of entertainment, so we just know it's always there. And again, as we talk to game studios, they all want to get onto that. But you're right. There's been plenty of nodes that have been stood up, and the first few buyers are very happy, and everybody else is unhappy. And I mean, we see that in our industry all the time, a little bit too much, right? The NFT craze, the meme coin craze. We get out over our skis far too often, and it's incumbent upon the studios that are starting into the DePin space to learn our lessons from the previous. You've gone too far. And just be patient and cautious, and don't buy into the hype, don't feed into the hype.
I would say 2 words: scale and predictability. Like right now, all of this is nascent, so no matter what, you're doing some amount of speculation, and which means if you're number 1, you should make some money. If you're number 2, you're definitely not going to make as much money. If you're number 30, you're at risk, and hopefully if you're number 5,000,001, the network has stabilized or the asset. I'm a firm believer that ultimately we're going to take speculation out of this model. Therefore, the transactional value of the token will become very stable. And then in that case, you're not worrying about kind of getting screwed. All you're worrying about is adoption. And I think that's the metric we should all worry about. Because if adoption doesn't occur, then you're just who's in line first and who's in line second. Is, you know, it's the don't get eaten by a bear just because I run faster than Matt argument. So
That's an excellent vision to end on. We're out of time. I did want to thank Cubic Labs for putting this on. This has been a great 3-day event. So thank you very much. If you guys have any other DePin questions, hit us up.